53 or 50 days left to go until Guild Wars 2 is launched, depending on if you pre-purchased or not. Hi guys, and welcome to the great Guild Wars 2 countdown. For today, just so that you are aware, there will be two different videos going up on the channel because I did desperately want to do servers, but also I found a lot of questions that I wanted to talk about as I was reading through the comments on yesterday. So hey, let's just go for two. Why not? The footage in the background of this video is from The Shadow with the 3. I was going to come from DG69, but then, sorry buddy, but your videos, they had way too much black bars on them and the quality was just terrible, so sorry I couldn't make it work. And then it was going to come from Rosie Gamer, but they removed all of their videos from their channel. So yeah, The Shadow, thank you very much to you. You can find a link down in the description below. The topic for today is kind of one of the big ones, honestly. It's something that I think most of us are familiar with already. If you're not already familiar with this in Guild Wars 2, then I would be a little bit worried for you, because I feel like this is one of those features that might catch people out and they might not quite understand what's going on. This is the downscaling system. So originally pegged as the side-kicking system when the game was in early development. Slowly this thing was refined and cut back in certain areas and altered in others until we have what in my opinion is the best way to go about things for Guild Wars 2. This is the idea that when you go into earlier level areas for the PvE world, your level and stats will scale down to a point that means you're not going to be one-shotting everything in the area, which keeps content fresh while you're still in those early places, because you might see parts of event change you've never seen before, so there will still, in theory, be new content to be experienced down there. And it also means you don't ruin the experience for anyone else, while at the same time, you do still feel like you've got more powerful because you're still going to be doing more damage as level 30 that's been scaled down into a level 5 area as when you were a level 5 in that level 5 area. So you still get that feeling that RPGs are good for, in that you're now decimating things that once gave you trouble, but at the same time you also aren't ruining the experience for anyone else, and you have this insurance that the entire PvE game is now open to you. When you're at level 80, you're not funneled into this artificially created end game scenario where you have to keep cycling and grinding through stuff to try and get yourself better and better gear, which is what most MMOs resort to. Now that you actually have this insurance, yeah, you're level 80, fine, you might have seen a lot of the world, but because of the way the game is designed to have its primary content based on dynamic events, which can change and are easily missed, it actually means that you can still go off and explore and find lots of cool stuff. And as the live team continue to update stuff, fingers crossed, there you will have a lot of incentive to go back into those areas. So it means a hell of a lot for endgame, and it means also, to me, the biggest thing that I like about this personally is I can spend as much damn time as I like in Queensdale or in the Plains of Ashford, right? I can spend as much time as I want there and level really super high and complete the same event over and over and over, even though I've already finished the heart in the area, and I won't care about it because there's no such thing as over leveling. I always have that in the back of my head on other MMOs and any RPG. I'm always thinking, oh god, I'm getting too high of a level. Now the stuff later on in the game is going to be too easy. That boss fight that's coming up isn't going to be as impactful as it should be. Should I stop? That is not a worry for me anymore. I don't have to worry at all. There are 5 races, each with their own starting areas, and I can spend as much time as I like doing whatever I want, and I know that I'm never going to completely diminish or remove my enjoyment of playing through those early game areas, because I'm still going to get reasonable rewards and the content is still going to be engaging. There is still a chance that if I'm a complete fool, I will die. If I get into a fight with too many things, if I try and complete a group event and I'm not careful on my own, I can die. There's still a challenge there. So it's really, really nice feature. It has, as I say, been refined since early on when the game was being developed. It was originally just penned the side-kicking system, and now we just kind of think of it as dynamic scaling of level, I suppose. Originally, you would level up as well. If you had a friend in a high-end area, you could, by whatever means, whether it would be a gold sink or what, you could level up to play alongside them. And the idea there was to encourage people to be sociable and not have to grind at all. But that, I always did maintain, would completely undermine leveling up and ruin a lot of the game. I really do think that would have been a terrible idea. It's kind of like why when Oblivion tried to do the same thing and they made sure everything was always your level, it kind of ruined the experience because you knew there was never a real challenge out there that you couldn't easily overcome because you could have just been side-kicked up, or in Oblivion's case there was never anything too powerful for you unless you just leveled poorly, which is a different discussion altogether. Anyway, the sidekick system has been changed, and it also has got some iteration there in World vs. World as well, and also you can consider PvP, competitive PvP, to be a part of the same system, and that automatically levels you to max as well. Really, the whole part of the game that is doing that. I think it's just a fantastic idea, and I would love to see more games doing it after Guild Wars 2's out, really, and I hope it works as well as I'm hoping it will work for the game. The only problem might be that if they don't tweak it exactly perfectly. But that is the topic for today. I'm starting to go on too long about those, but you can find a link in the description if you want to do some further reading on it. I just had loads of comments I was reading through, and I was just copy-pasting them into my file here, so I'm just going to go through and just scroll through. We'll spend as long as we have to spend. Who cares? Before the questions, actually, I was linked. Once again, I've got somebody linking stuff to me now, which is awesome. To ArenaNet on Facebook are actually letting you vote. They've got a poll going on t-shirts, Guild Wars 2 t-shirts that they're selling. So if you want to go check that out, if you're interested in t-shirts or different designs and stuff, you'll also find a link to that on Facebook. It's kind of cool, the different designs there. I'm not usually a t-shirt kind of guy, but I think I might end up getting one of these t-shirts. I really like one of the designs. One or two, in fact, but we'll see which one to get through. Anyway, right, so the questions. The first one comes from Guild Wars 2 Live Online, who said, we know that Logan, Kaith, Air, Zodja, and Ritlock are the main heroes except you. Don't forget Snaff. They will have a giant part in the story, so what about the characters left from the Ghosts of Ascalon novel, Gullick, Ember, and Dougal? And what about Clag? Will we see them somewhere or interact with them? I've seen Dougal in LA, but what about the others? Will they have any important part in the game? That's a good question, and not a question we can answer at the moment, because one of the main things ArenaNet have been still very silent on, and I agree with them on being silent on, is the personal story stuff. This, if it did end up meaning something for the game, it would be personal story related. It would be later on, maybe we'd meet Gullick if we were in the end game kind of personal story, or it was at the end of their races arc. That would be where these things would appear. I'd like to see that appear in the personal story. It could be that these characters here have just kind of been relegated to just small kind of cameo appearances in the game, like Dougal, as you say, here in LA. I didn't actually see him in LA myself, but if he was there, I doubt it would be in any kind of major capacity. Maybe you could just ask him about the events of the book, and that would be it. For those of you who haven't read Ghosts of Ascalon or don't know who these characters are, that was the first novel that came out, and while the second novel that came out focused on the 5 main characters in Guild Wars 2, so it's very relevant for those characters as far as that's concerned, the adventuring party in Ghosts of Ascalon actually is a bit more dynamic in that some of them come, some of them go, some of them have certain allegiances, so it kind of splits up a bit more, but by the end of the book, which actually in my opinion is why the book's a bit better. I prefer Ghosts of Ascalon. But the guys here in this novel, they're not necessarily such important characters as Destiny's Edge, who we're trying to bring back together after they all split up at the end of the second novel. So what their role will be specifically would be interesting. One thing I wouldn't like ArenaNet to do, though, is there could be a temptation there. If they're going to try and make the Ghosts of Ascalon NPCs important, there would be a temptation for them to have Dougal important, to have Ember important, to have Garlic, to have all of them really important. But if it was up to me, I wouldn't do that. There's nothing wrong with them having just Garlic be a really important character, and for the events of the Guild Wars 2 storyline, the other ones kind of just fall a bit into obscurity and they don't have a massive role to play in the story. Do you know what? That would be far more realistic and believable and more of a compelling story to me than if they just developed some formula where every character has to have some influential role in the plot. I don't think they should do that, because that's not natural, and I always like it when they kind of throw curveballs like that. Let's see Gullick be an important character, but maybe, yeah, if Dougal's at LA, let's just have him wandering around kicking the dust and never doing anything after the Ghost of Ascalon. Have him be a bit of a tragic character, or a character that just fades out, because that happens in the real world. I like it when stories do that, and Guild Wars has got a tendency, I'll say that much, to always have everything super even, and often it doesn't pan out right. So yeah, to answer your question, we don't know 100% right now, but that would be what I would speculate about. The next question is from Ansem, what 136924, who said, what race do you think is the most likely to be played upon release? I thought this was a fitting question since release is coming up. Humans, without a doubt. I saw somebody reply to this guy, I think it was this guy, who said, oh, why would you want to play a human in a fantasy RPG? And a lot of people do have that opinion, but it will be humans that are played most. That was evident from the first polls ages ago, and I am sure that it will still be humans, and that has not changed by the launch of the game. The truth is, to a lot of people, Guild Wars 2 is a new IP, and they will get into character creator, and Guild Wars 2 has got a lot of options for character creator. We all know it. There's a lot that you can choose, and one of the first things they'll do is get to that screen with all the races, and they'll think, right, okay, what race do I want to play? And if they don't know anything about the lore, which, let's admit it, 90% of people won't, they'll just look at either what they are familiar with or what they think looks kind of cool, right? That's probably going to be the two thoughts that go through people's heads. And the people that go for whatever they think looks cool are then just going to be split among all of the races, right? They might think that the kind of more elven, because they're going to see them as elves, Sylvari look cool. Some people will think that. Some will think the Char look cooler. Some people will think that the short people look cooler, the Asura. So they're all going to get split off into different camps. But a vast majority of people that just want to go with what they're familiar with, well, they're going to see humans. And they're going to be, right, okay, the human is the only recognizable term I see here. Guild Wars 2 shied from loads of terms like dwarves and orcs and stuff like that. They're not playable races, and that's on purpose to make Guild Wars 2 a distinct game, but it does mean that people that just want something they're familiar with and they know what they're getting into, they're going to go with humans, and I guarantee humans will be the most played class at the launch of the game, definitely. A more interesting question is what's going to be most played after that. With the fact that the betas have not shown the Sylvari or the Asura, it's become a more interesting question because polls used to show that the Sylvari for a while, before we had a lot of the lore came out, the Sylvari, but most in particular the Asura, and they've remained that way for a long time, were going to be the least played race, the Asura. But now that they've not been available in betas, I think a lot of those people that have been in the beta are going to be excited to play those Tarnished Coast races too. I think we'll see a hell of a lot of Sylvari just because they've got a massive following already of people that love their style, and they've not been in the beta, so we'll see a lot of Sylvari. I think the least place is going to come down to either the Norn or the Asura, because the Char are going to be really high. Everybody loves the Char anyway. They'll be really high. The humans will be really high, and the Sylvari. But the Norn and the Asura, I think, will be competing for last place. And the Norn might just edge over it, because, as I say, the Asura are kind of exclusive, because we haven't seen them in beta yet. Oh, by the way, also an interview came out recently where they were asked, hey, are we going to be able to play the Tarnished Coast races when we get into the last beta? And they didn't rule it out completely. So, hey, maybe they will be available in the next beta. But so far, it doesn't look like it. And as I've said before, I'm not expecting it. I'd love it if it happened. I'm not going to wish it doesn't happen, but I'm not expecting it. The next question was asked by Albunajerk, who said, I don't completely understand your reasoning when it comes to the gods. They were real beings that lived on Tyria. The Char don't deny their existence, they just see them as enemies. Whether other races like them or not, they are some of the most powerful things to ever be present on the planet. Considering that we know that the gods still know what is going on Tyria, I would completely expect their influence to be seen at least, unless they're scared of the dragons. That would be cool. Well, your question about my reasoning for why I don't think we're going to see anything massively on the gods, it's not so much that the other races don't believe in these entities. We do know, you're completely right, we do know that the gods actually exist. They're not gods in that you might be expecting in the real world. In the gods in the real world, people don't actually have solid factual evidence about. In this fantasy game, and Guild Wars isn't the only fantasy game, the gods are real things, and people do know that they are real. It's just whether you choose to worship them as deities or not. That's the distinction there. I don't think that we'll be seeing the gods as a main facet of the storyline going forward in Guild Wars 2. Not because a certain race doesn't believe in them or chooses not to worship them, but because they simply aren't a significant part of that race's story. The Char aren't a very good example, because they would actually be, that would be a very compelling story. The Char don't like the gods at all, actually, and that actually builds up some kind of history there. So if they did do an expansion that was very much focused on the human gods, yeah, that would be really cool to play as a Char, and you'd see the Char perspective of that. If the human gods came back, that would be cool. The Char play into that story really well. But then you've got the Sylvari that just don't really know, they've never seen the human gods and don't really have much of an opinion about them. They know that people exist in them, but aside from that, they're just like, right, okay, these things are here, but we don't really have much of an affinity for them. So then, and the story there is much weaker, and you can make arguments for why it would be interesting from any of these races' perspectives to see the gods. I mean, as an Asura, you would be like, oh, this is a big cog in the Eternal Alchemy. As a Norn, you could have an interesting story about how they're trying to view them and map them as a spirit of the wild or something. There are these minor things, but they don't tie in massively to what the rest of the race or the culture's about. So it's similar to me saying that they could release an expansion where loads of the spirits of the wild come and attack, or loads of the spirits of the wild die. And is that going to be that compelling as playing as an Asura? Well, no. Or as a human? Not necessarily. So it's not just with the human gods. They have to view all of these races equally now. And it's difficult because Guild Wars 1 was very human-centric, and there's a lot about the humans in Guild Wars 1, and a lot of that lore's already been written. So now we do have to try and shift out of that mindset. And I wouldn't like to shift out of that mindset. I'm very committed, and I like the lore that was established in Guild Wars 1. But I think now it's got to be more of a level playing field, and that's what ArenaNet are going for. I don't think they're going to try and shoehorn in a story that's very specific to one race and then try and map all the other races around it. They'll just invent other stories that kind of go across the top. Having said that, you know, that we've seen that the Isles of Janthir are there and stuff, and I'm sure that's going to have something to do with the White Mantle and Mersat, which again is human-centric. So it's all on the table at the moment. It definitely is. It's just I'm not expecting it. Hopefully that clears things up. The next question is from Sets206. Yeah, can you guys see I had a lot of questions today I wanted to talk about a lot? I've got one more after this. Do you think that we will eventually get to Elona and Cantha in Guild Wars 2, that these areas will still be African or Asian themed since the game is not human-centric anymore? I just think it would be kind of strange since there's more races involved in the game now than just humans. But what do you think? Well, this is the same kind of topic. I actually think that they will continue to do this, mostly because there's a massive shift to then move away from that. The problem with Guild Wars 1 was when the original game first came out, Prophecies, they introduced this massive continent that had loads of different landscapes and regions and stuff and covered quite a lot of bases. And then they released the next campaigns and they were like, oh god, how do we make it distinct? So they kind of mapped it off of real world cultures and did that, so we had the African and the Asian theme. Well, that won't necessarily happen with Guild Wars 2, so when we're talking about going to places that aren't Cantha or Elona in expansions, I don't know whether they'll continue. Like, Utopia was supposed to be an Aztec theme beyond that, but whether they'll continue to map like that for Guild Wars 2, I can't say for sure. But I do think they'll keep these themes, at least for Cantha and Elona, because that's already been established, and they're a big part of the identity of those areas. I don't think the fact that we can, in spite of what I just said in the previous question, I don't think that the fact we can now play all these other races will affect that. In fact, I think that would be really, really cool. To me, the concept of a Norn living in those mountains in Cantha, like where Minister Wona's estate was, is such a bizarre, weird thought, because it's taking two very different bits of lore and putting them together, but it meshes in a really nice way that it actually quite excites me. And it's the same idea here, that you could have Char that are kind of adhering to this Asianish theme when they get down into Cantha, and it's a very bizarre concept from the get-go to have any of these other races that aren't humans down there in Cantha and Elona, but they will be there, and I would love to see how they just make it all fit in together. I really do. I think putting those twists on the races and the cultures as they move down will be just as fascinating to see for a Char as it was to see how the humans had these twists on their cultures as they went over great distances. So I think we will see it. I don't think it hurts it at all now that we've got different races. I think it helps it an awful lot. The last question is from KegAE45, who said, do you think the personal storyline will bring serious answers to some of the more unknown lore questions? I'd love to see the human storyline have the conclusion that explains the disappearance of the Six, or an explanation as to why you are blessed by a specific god. What you mentioned here with being blessed, I would be tempted to say no. The personal story, I'm not expecting it to go into these massive things, and I'm not sure why. I feel like they're only going to try and cover one big topic with each release of the game, each campaign or each expansion that they do with Guild Wars 2, and obviously for launch that's Zaitan, so I'm of the opinion that they probably won't go into massive things like that, like the gods. I don't think you'd ever see the gods return to Tyria, but only if you played as a human and only if you did a certain branch of the personal storyline. I can't see that happening. But you do mention here this choice you get to make in the early personal storyline stuff that so far doesn't seem to impact anything from what we've seen in the betas, where you choose what god blessed you. And that's true, so maybe we will have some kind of connection with a single god later on in the personal storyline, but I'm not expecting anything massive, or nothing that I would consider massive. You will see as the summaries, the lore summary series continues soon enough, you will see there's this massive character called Saul D'Alessio that went missing in early Prophecies lore. Like, he disappeared. He wasn't killed. He was told, everyone was told that he was killed in Kryta, but actually he was taken away. And it's this fascinating story to me, and I'd love to know what happened to this character, but I can't see them doing it in Guild Wars 2, not at launch. I'm actually slightly scared that they'll just fob him off and have like a single event chain, like a meta event, and it'll be like, oh, no, you get to defeat Saul D'Alessio's ghost. I would hate it if that happened. That would be horrible, and I don't think that would be a good send-off for a lot of the really mysterious, awesome questions that happen in Guild Wars 2. In an ideal world, I would want all the personal stories to come into all these different things and do them all justice, but I know that I'm setting myself up for disappointment in that regard, because ArenaNet made a fundamental decision with the game that they, instead of having one big long storyline, they were going to have lots of little storylines that encompass one overarching plot. So by that I mean you have games like Final Fantasies that have one specific narrative, and you do get to make small choices as you go through it, but it's a single story that they've made, and they make it perfectly, or they try to make it perfectly, so it tugs on your heartstrings at the right moments, and it gets you really emotionally invested, and all the pacing's perfect. Well, with Guild Wars 2, they have to split all of that effort into loads of different storylines now. So if you're playing through the Vigil stuff, for example, and there's loads of choices you can make in the Vigil things, for every one of those choices there's going to be a series of quests and progressions in the personal story that if ArenaNet had decided to make one single story, then you would just have one really long, awesome experience. But now that's going to be diminished because there's so many different choices. For me, I personally wouldn't have gone that way, but I'm so into the story, I would have just wanted one solid story without all these choices, without, you know, maybe you could have the different races, but it wouldn't have so much of an impact later on. It would just be one solid story. But they've split it in so many different places now. I'm scared that they'll ever touch on any of these big things that you're talking about here, like the disappearance of the Sixth. I'm scared because if they did decide that the Norn story was going to explain everything about the spirits of the wild, but only if you chose a specific branch as a Norn, I would hate to see that, because it's not going to get the justice it deserves, because it's only going to be one small storyline alongside many others that the developers have had to split their time on. So in a weird way, even though I'd love to see the story go into these things and I'd love to get these answers, I also hope they don't try and answer them until they can dedicate an entire expansion to it, which is unrealistic because there's so many of these stories having an expansion for every single one. We wouldn't have it finished till like 2030. So I mean, it's not going to happen. They're going to have to cut corners here and there, and I know at some point I'll be disappointed, but hopefully for the most part ArenaNet care about the stories they know the players care about, and those will be the ones that get the most justice done to them. Anyway, there you go guys, that's the great Guild Wars 2 countdown for today. Thank you very much for watching. As I said, there will be a server video going up later, and I guess I will see you tomorrow when we are down into the 40s. Hooray, I'll see you next time.